Welcome back to our channel, your favorite spot for terrifying tales and spine-chilling stories. Tonight, we have something truly eerie for you. A haunting story that will make you question every creak and groan you hear at night. This one is called The Attic Dweller. So sit back, turn off the lights, and get ready, because what happens next will be terrifying. Let's begin. Tom and Emma Jenkins had been married for nearly 10 years when they decided it was time for a fresh start. Life in the city had worn them down. The endless noise, the traffic, and the fast-paced lifestyle. They wanted something quieter, a place where their two children, Lily and Max, could grow up away from the chaos. That's why, when they found an old house for sale on the outskirts of a small town, it felt like destiny. The house was large, with a beautiful, sprawling yard that seemed perfect for the kids to play in. It was also cheap, suspiciously so, but the family didn't think too much of it. Tom chalked it up to the fact that the house was old, and Emma convinced herself that it was just one of those rare finds that people often dream of. It was their dream home, until they moved in. At first, things were peaceful. The Jenkins family spent the first week unpacking boxes, organizing furniture, and exploring their new space. Max, the youngest, had immediately taken to the backyard, while Lily was fascinated by the big windows that allowed light to flood every room. But amid all the excitement, there was one place in the house that no one ventured: the attic. The attic door sat at the top of a narrow staircase, tucked away in a dark corner of the second floor. It was locked, and no one had been able to find the key. Tom didn't think much of it at first. Old houses often came with locked doors, forgotten storage spaces full of junk. But something about that door unnerved him. It felt wrong, somehow. It felt like something was waiting behind it. The first week passed without incident, though Tom noticed that each time he walked past the attic door, a strange feeling would come over him. It was almost like the air around the door was heavier, colder. Emma had joked that maybe they'd find some old treasure up there, but Tom wasn't convinced. The house had been abandoned for years, after all, and whatever was up there had likely been forgotten for a reason. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Tom found himself staring at the attic door again. He felt drawn to it, like it was calling him. Maybe it was his imagination, or maybe it was something else entirely, but he decided he couldn't ignore it any longer. He grabbed a flashlight and some tools from the garage, intent on finally opening that door. As he worked on the lock, his hands trembled slightly. It wasn't that he was scared, at least that's what he told himself, but there was a strange tension in the air, as if something was waiting on the other side. After a few minutes of fiddling with the lock, there was a soft click and the door creaked open. What Tom saw inside sent a chill down his spine. The attic was dark, illuminated only by the narrow beam of his flashlight. Dust hung in the air, swirling in the dim light, as if disturbed by his presence. The first thing he noticed was the smell, a musty, metallic odor that made his stomach turn. He swept the flashlight across the room, revealing old wooden beams, cobwebs, and scattered boxes. But in the center of the attic, there was something far more unsettling. A single wooden chair sat in the middle of the floor, its arms and legs bound with thick, frayed ropes. Dark stains covered the floor beneath it, and Tom felt his heart race as he realized what they were. Blood. The chair looked as if someone had been tied to it, held there for who knows how long. Tom's mind raced with possibilities. Had something terrible happened here? Was this house hiding a dark secret? As he stood there, frozen in the doorway, a soft thump echoed from somewhere deep within the attic. The sound was faint but unmistakable, like something heavy had shifted. Suddenly, the attic didn't feel so empty. Tom backed out of the room quickly, his heart pounding in his chest, He slammed the door shut and ran downstairs, trying to shake the feeling of dread that clung to him. When he told Emma what he had seen, she looked at him with concern. The next few days passed uneventfully, but Tom couldn't shake the image of that chair from his mind. He tried to convince himself that it was just an old piece of furniture, that the bloodstains were probably rust or something else, but deep down, he knew better. And as the days passed, the strange noises continued. At first, they were barely noticeable. Soft thumps, like something falling over in the attic, but soon the sounds grew louder. There were footsteps now, slow and deliberate, moving above their heads at night. Sometimes there was a dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Tom tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. The tension in the house grew with each passing day, and soon even the kids started to notice. Lily, always the more sensitive of the two, began complaining about strange dreams. She said she saw a man in her room at night, standing in the corner watching her. Max, too young to understand, would cry in his sleep, waking up in a panic without knowing why. One night, the noises became impossible to ignore. It was past midnight, and the house was deathly quiet, except for the soft creaking of the floorboards in the attic. Tom lay in bed, listening intently, his body tense with anticipation. The footsteps were heavier now, moving back and forth across the attic like someone, or something, was pacing. Then, suddenly, there was a loud bang. Tom sat up in bed, his heart racing. The sound had come from directly above them, right over their bedroom. Emma stirred beside him, her eyes wide with fear. They both knew where the noise had come from. The attic. Tom grabbed a flashlight and slowly made his way upstairs, each step feeling like an eternity. The air was cold, colder than it should have been for a summer night, and as he reached the top of the stairs, he noticed that the attic door was slightly ajar, the same door he had locked after his first visit. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The attic was just as dark and musty as before, but this time, something was different. The chair in the center of the room had moved. It was no longer facing the wall. It was now turned toward the door, as if waiting for him. Tom's breath caught in his throat as he noticed something else. There was a figure sitting in the chair. A dark, shadowy figure, barely visible in the dim light. What happens next will be terrifying, he thought, his body frozen with fear. The figure didn't move. It just sat there, silent and still. Tom's mind raced with questions. Who was it? How had they gotten into the attic? And most importantly, what did they want? He backed away slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to get out of there, had to get back downstairs to Emma and the kids. But as he turned to leave, the figure in the chair moved. It wasn't a person. It was a shadow. A dark, twisted mass that seemed to shift and change as it rose from the chair. Tom watched in horror as the shadow moved toward him, its form stretching and elongating as it approached. What happens next will be terrifying, he thought again, his mind screaming at him to run. But his feet wouldn't move. He was rooted to the spot, paralyzed with fear as the shadow drew closer. It reached out, its dark tendrils curling around him, cold and suffocating. Tom gasped for air, but it was no use. The shadow was pulling him in, dragging him toward the chair. Suddenly, he snapped out of his paralysis. He turned and bolted for the stairs, his feet pounding the floor as he raced down to the second floor. He didn't stop until he was back in the bedroom, slamming the door behind him. Emma looked at him, her face pale with fear. She had heard the noises too, had felt the coldness in the air. They both knew that something was very wrong. The next morning, Tom made a decision. They had to leave the house. Whatever was in the attic wasn't going to stop, and staying there was too dangerous. Emma agreed. But the problem was they had no idea how to explain it to the kids. How do you tell your children that their home, the place that was supposed to be their safe haven, was haunted? As they prepared to leave, strange things began happening. The front door wouldn't open, no matter how hard Tom tried. The windows, which had opened easily before, were now stuck shut. It was as if the house didn't want them to leave. Tom stood in the foyer, his hands shaking as he pulled at the front door with all his strength. But it wouldn't budge. He had tried everything, turning the lock, ramming his shoulder into it, even using tools from the garage. But it was as if the house itself had locked them in. Emma was upstairs, trying to comfort the kids, but Tom knew she was just as scared as he was. The windows, like the doors, were stuck. Not just shut, stuck as if welded into the frames. It didn't make sense, and the more he thought about it, the more his heart pounded. He felt trapped, like an animal in a cage. The attic. His thoughts kept drifting back to that shadowy figure, the way it had moved toward him, stretching and shifting as if it were alive. What did it want? Why was it here? And why was the house suddenly fighting them, keeping them prisoner? Tom's mind raced, and for a brief moment he considered breaking a window, but the house was old, and the glass in those windows was thick. He wasn't sure if he could break through it, and even if he did, would the house let them leave? Something was controlling this, something beyond his understanding. As he stood there, debating his next move, a loud crash echoed from upstairs. It was followed by a scream, Emma's scream. Tom's blood ran cold. Without thinking, he sprinted up the stairs, 2 at a time, his heart in his throat. When he reached the second floor, he found Emma in the hallway, standing outside Lily and Max's room. She was pale, her eyes wide with fear, and she was pointing toward the attic stairs. "Tom, it's happening again," she whispered, her voice shaking. Tom didn't need to ask what she meant. The footsteps, the slow, deliberate footsteps that had haunted their nights, had started again. They echoed from the attic above, louder this time, as if whatever was up there had grown bolder. He felt a surge of panic. "Stay with the kids," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he couldn't let this go on. He had to stop it somehow. Tom grabbed the flashlight from their bedroom and made his way to the attic stairs. His legs felt heavy, each step more difficult than the last, as if the house itself was trying to hold him back. He could feel the weight of something dark and unseen pressing down on him. At the top of the stairs, he hesitated. The attic door was slightly open again, just like before, but this time, he didn't have to force himself inside. The door creaked open on its own, as if inviting him in. The air in the attic was colder than before, and the darkness seemed thicker, more oppressive. The chair was still there, sitting in the center of the room, and the ropes that had once hung loosely were now taut, as if holding an invisible prisoner. The stains on the floor, Tom couldn't ignore them any longer. They weren't rust or dirt, they were blood. But the worst part was the shadow. It was no longer a vague figure in the dark. Now it stood before him, its form clearer, more defined. It was tall, unnaturally so, with long, twisted limbs that seemed to stretch toward the walls. Its face, or what passed for a face, was a shifting mass of shadows, with hollow, glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through Tom. The thing didn't move, but Tom could feel its presence, heavy and suffocating. He felt its anger, its hatred, directed straight at him. What happens next will be terrifying, he thought, trying to brace himself for whatever came next. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut behind him, plunging the room into complete darkness. Tom spun around, his heart racing. He fumbled for the flashlight, But before he could turn it on, he felt something cold wrap around his wrist. It wasn't a hand, it was something else. Something cold, like ice, yet it burned at the same time. He yanked his arm back, but the grip tightened, pulling him toward the chair. Panic surged through him as he realized what was happening. The shadow was trying to drag him closer, trying to take him. Tom fought against it, using every ounce of strength he had. He could feel the tendrils of shadow wrapping around him, pulling him towards the center of the room. His mind raced. He had to get out, had to escape before it was too late. Just when he thought he couldn't fight anymore, the door to the attic burst open, flooding the room with light. Emma stood at the top of the stairs, her face pale with terror. She had the kids with her, both of them clinging to her legs, wide-eyed and frightened. Tom felt the grip on his wrist loosen, and with a final burst of strength, he pulled free, stumbling toward the door. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The shadow was still there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for him to return. They all ran downstairs, Emma dragging the kids behind her, Tom slamming the door to the attic shut behind them. They didn't stop until they reached the kitchen, where they collapsed in a heap, gasping for breath. Tom's mind was racing. What was that thing? Why was it in their house? And most importantly, how were they going to get out? For the next few hours, they sat in the kitchen, too scared to move, too scared to sleep. The house was silent now, but they knew it wouldn't last. Whatever was in the attic wasn't done with them yet. As dawn broke, Tom made a decision. They had to find a way to escape, even if it meant breaking every window in the house. He wasn't going to let his family stay in this cursed place any longer. But as he stood up, ready to grab a hammer from the garage, something strange happened. The front door opened. It didn't creak or groan, it just opened, as if the house was letting them leave. Tom stared at it in disbelief, unsure whether to trust it. Was this another trick? Another attempt by the house to trap them? But they didn't have a choice. They had to take the chance. Grabbing the kids, he and Emma bolted for the door, not stopping until they were outside, breathing the fresh morning air. As they stood there, trembling and exhausted, Tom glanced back at the house. The attic window was open now, and in the faint light of dawn he saw the shadow. It was watching them, its glowing eyes fixed on him. What happens next will be terrifying, he thought, as they climbed into the car and drove away, never looking back. And that concludes tonight's horrifying story, The Attic Dweller. If you enjoyed this tale and want more spine-chilling stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. You never know when the next terrifying tale might come to your screen. Sweet dreams, if you can sleep tonight.